"I'm calling the police," I said calmly, standing in my own kitchen while my husband begged me not to destroy his life. "You might think you know how this story ends, but trust me, you don't. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about finding yourself when everything you believed turns out to be a beautiful lie. My name is Margaret Sullivan, though most folks call me Maggie. I'm 74 years old, and I've been married to Richard for 46 years. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. A devoted wife, a loving grandmother, and a woman who'd done everything right. Turns out I was wrong about all of it. And the worst part? I didn't even see it coming. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stay with me. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It warms this old heart to know where my words travel. Now, let me take you back to that Tuesday morning when my carefully constructed world started cracking at the seams. It was raining that Tuesday. I remember because Richard complained about his golf game being canceled. "Looks like I'll be stuck inside all day," he said, buttering his toast with more force than necessary. Might as well catch up on some paperwork in the study. Richard had sold his insurance business 5 years earlier, but he still maintained an office at home for what he called consulting work. I'd long stopped asking questions about what exactly he was consulting on. "I'll make your favorite stew for dinner," I offered, watching him scroll through his phone with an intensity that seemed unusual even for him. He grunted in response, eyes never leaving the screen. 46 years of marriage had taught me to recognize when something was off, but I pushed the feeling down like I always did. Richard was a good man, a good provider, a good husband. I repeated these phrases to myself like prayers. That afternoon, while Richard was supposedly working in his study, I received a call from my daughter Emily. "Mom, can you watch the kids on Friday? David and I have that anniversary dinner." "Of course, sweetheart. Bring them by whenever you need. You're a lifesaver. Sarah's been asking to bake cookies with you anyway." Emily paused. "Is Dad around? David wanted to ask him something about refinancing." "He's in his study. Should I get him?" "No, that's okay. I'll have David call him later." "Mom, are you all right? You sound tired." I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, a 74-year-old woman with silver hair and laugh lines that had deepened into permanent grooves. When had I started looking so old? "I'm fine, dear. Just a long day." After hanging up, I decided to bring Richard some coffee. He liked it at 3 o'clock sharp, black with 1 sugar. I'd been making it the same way for 46 years. His study door was slightly open, and I heard him talking in a low voice. At first, I assumed it was a phone call, but then I heard the unmistakable sound of a woman's laugh through his computer speakers. I should have knocked. Instead, I pushed the door open just enough to see the screen. Richard was on a video call with a woman I'd never seen before. She was young, perhaps 40 at most, with dark hair and bright red lips. She was laughing at something he'd said, touching her collarbone in a way that made my stomach turn. "Richard, you're terrible," she cooed through the speakers. "You love it when I'm terrible," he replied, his voice carrying a playfulness I hadn't heard in decades. I must have made a sound because Richard spun around, his face cycling through surprise, panic, and then something that looked almost like defiance. "Maggie, I set the coffee cup down on his desk with a sharp click that felt satisfying. "Your coffee. 3 o'clock, 1 sugar, like always." Then I walked out, closing the door behind me with exaggerated gentleness. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I did what any rational 74-year-old woman would do. I called my best friend Helen and asked her to meet me at the coffee shop downtown. Helen had been my friend since college, back when we were both young and stupid and thought we knew everything about love. She'd been divorced twice and widowed once, so if anyone understood the treachery of men, it was Helen. "He's having an affair," I said flatly, stirring my chamomile tea without drinking it. Helen's eyebrows shot up. "Richard? Are you sure?" "I saw him video chatting with some woman. The way they were talking." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Oh, honey!" Helen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to pretend I never saw it. We're too old for this kind of drama." "Margaret Sullivan, don't you dare." Helen's voice was sharp. "You're never too old to demand respect. Trust me, I learned that the hard way." "But 46 years, Helen. What do I do with 46 years? When you've built your whole life around someone, how do you even begin to unbuild it? You figure out the truth, all of it. Because if Richard's cheating, there's usually more you don't know about. Helen's words echoed in my head as I drove home. More I didn't know about. What else had I been blind to? That evening, Richard acted like nothing had happened. He ate my stew, complimented the seasoning, and asked about my day at the community center where I volunteered. It was almost impressive how effortlessly he lied. "How was your day?" I asked, watching his face carefully. "Boring, just paperwork. You know how it is? Any interesting calls?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing worth mentioning." I nodded and cleared the dishes, each movement mechanical and precise. In the kitchen, I stood at the sink and realized I'd been performing this exact routine for 46 years. When had my life become a series of repetitive motions, each day identical to the last? That night, I waited until Richard was asleep, his snoring filling our bedroom like it had for decades, and I did something I'd never done before. I took his phone from the nightstand and brought it to the bathroom. His passcode was our anniversary date. Of course it was. Even his infidelity was predictable. What I found made me physically ill. Messages to someone named Cheryl dating back 8 months. Explicit photos. Plans to meet at hotels. Discussions about leaving me once the money situation was sorted out. The money situation. With shaking hands, I opened his email. What I discovered there was so much worse than an affair. Richard had been moving money from our joint accounts into ones I'd never known about. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling me. He'd drained my late mother's inheritance, money I'd planned to leave to Emily and her children. Over $400,000 was simply gone. I sat on the bathroom floor, my mother's bracelet cold against my wrist, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for Richard or our marriage, but for the woman I'd been, the one who'd trusted so completely that she'd never thought to look. The next morning, I called my nephew James. He was a financial analyst and, more importantly, someone I trusted completely. "Aunt Maggie, is everything okay? It's 7 in the morning. James, I need your help, and I need you not to tell anyone, especially your Uncle Richard." There was a pause. "What's going on?" I told him everything. The video call, the messages, the money. James was silent for a long moment. "Send me everything you found. Account numbers, transfers, all of it. I'll start digging today." "Thank you, sweetheart." "Aunt Maggie, whatever you're planning, you have my full support. Uncle Richard is an idiot." That made me smile despite everything. Over the next week, I became someone I didn't recognize. I documented everything with photographs. I opened my own bank account at a different institution. I changed the passwords on every account I had access to. I moved half of what remained in our joint account to my new account, not to steal, but to protect myself. Richard noticed nothing. He was too busy planning his escape with Cheryl to pay attention to his elderly wife. On Thursday, James called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Aunt Maggie, it's worse than we thought. Richard hasn't just been stealing from you. He's been running an investment scam. He's been telling his old clients that he's managing their retirement funds, taking their money, and using it to fund his lifestyle. We're talking about at least 15 people, maybe more. Total damages could be over $2 million. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. $2 million? He's a con artist, Aunt Maggie. He's been doing this for years, probably since before he sold the business. The affair is just a side effect of having too much money and too little conscience. What do I do? You protect yourself. Get a lawyer. Today. And then you decide if you want to turn him into the authorities." I spent the rest of that day in a fog. My husband wasn't just unfaithful, he was a criminal. How many lives had he ruined? How many retirees were now struggling because Richard wanted to maintain his lifestyle and impress his mistress? That evening, Richard announced he had a business trip to Cleveland over the weekend. "That's sudden," I said mildly. "Last-minute thing. Client emergency." He didn't even try to make it sound convincing. "Will you be staying at the usual hotel?" "Probably. I'll text you when I get there." After he left on Friday morning, I did what I should have done a week earlier. I called a lawyer. Robert Chen was recommended by Helen, who'd used him for her second divorce. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, but his eyes were kind and his handshake was firm. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've reviewed the documents you sent over. This is quite serious. How serious? Your husband could be facing significant prison time. Wire fraud, theft, identity theft, tax evasion, the list goes on. And given the amount of money involved, we're looking at federal charges. I felt strangely calm. What about protecting myself? That's why you're here. First, we file for divorce immediately. Second, we notify the authorities about the fraud. Third, we make it clear that you had no knowledge of his activities. The last thing you want is to be implicated in his crimes. Will I lose everything? Robert leaned back in his chair. Possibly. When the victims file civil suits, they'll go after all marital assets. Your house, your savings, everything. But if we move quickly and establish your innocence, we can argue that certain assets should be protected as they were obtained before the criminal activity began or were solely in your name. Do it. All of it. Are you sure? This will be public. Messy. Your husband will likely try to claim you knew about everything. I thought about Cheryl's messages, about the retirees Richard had stolen from, about 46 years of being taken for granted. I'm sure. That night, Emily called. Mom, did you know Dad's in Cleveland? He mentioned a business trip. That's weird. David called the hotel Dad usually stays at, and they said they don't have a reservation under his name. My stomach nodded. Maybe he's staying somewhere different this time. Maybe. Mom, is everything okay between you and Dad? You've seemed distant lately. I wanted to tell her everything, but not over the phone. Not yet. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about us old folks. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Tomorrow I would burn down the life I'd built. Tomorrow Richard's world would implode. But tonight I would mourn the woman I'd been, the one who'd believed in fairy tales and forever. Richard came home Sunday afternoon, looking tan and relaxed. He kissed my cheek like he always did and asked what was for dinner. We need to talk, I said. He froze, his overnight bag still in his hand. About what? Sit down, Richard. I watched him calculate whether he could talk his way out of this, whatever this was. Finally, he sat. I placed a folder on the kitchen table between us. I know about Cheryl. His face went pale, but he recovered quickly. Maggie, I can explain. I know about the money. The accounts. The second mortgage on our house. My mother's inheritance. Now wait just a minute. I know about the investment scam. The 15 people whose retirement you stole. The $2 million you've embezzled over the past 5 years. Richard stood up abruptly. You don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. I've already filed for divorce. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning to arrest you. My lawyer has all the evidence. That's when it hit him. I wasn't bluffing. The color drained from his face entirely. You can't do this. After everything I've given you, you've given me 46 years of lies. Maggie, please. We can work this out. I'll end things with Cheryl. I'll pay the money back. Just don't do this. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and felt nothing but contempt. You've stolen from elderly people who trusted you, people who gave you their life savings. You've betrayed me in every way possible. And you think this is something we can work out? I'm your husband. You stopped being my husband the moment you decided I was too stupid to notice what you were doing. Richard's face hardened. You'll lose everything too. The house, your lifestyle, all of it. You'll be a laughingstock. Is that really what you want? What I want is to look at myself in the mirror without feeling ashamed. You've taken enough from me, Richard. You don't get to take my dignity too. The next morning, I watched from my bedroom window as FBI agents led Richard out of our house in handcuffs. The neighbors were watching, of course. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you underestimate a 74-year-old woman. The trial took 8 months. Richard pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and theft. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. You'd think watching your husband get led away in handcuffs would break you. But for me, it rebuilt me. I lost the house. Richard's victims successfully sued for damages, and everything we'd built together was liquidated to repay them. It wasn't nearly enough. Most of them lost their life savings, but it was something. Emily stood by me through all of it, even when the media portrayed me as either complicit or impossibly naive. David, my son-in-law, hired a PR firm to help manage the narrative. You're a victim too, he kept saying. People need to understand that. But I didn't feel like a victim. I felt free. I moved into a small apartment downtown, near the coffee shop where Helen and I had our first conversation about Richard's affair. I got a part-time job at the community center I'd volunteered at for years. I learned to live on a budget for the first time since I was 25. Funny thing, sometimes you have to lose everything to find peace. And you know what? I was happier than I'd been in decades. Helen moved into the apartment next door. "Someone needs to make sure you don't become one of those sad old ladies who talks to cats," she said while helping me unpack. I like cats. Exactly my point. On what would have been my 47th wedding anniversary, Emily took me out to dinner. She was pregnant with her third child, and I watched her glow with happiness while discussing nursery colors. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Do you regret it? Turning Dad in?" I thought about Richard in his prison cell, about the life we'd had, about the woman I used to be. Not even for a second. The only thing I regret is not seeing the truth sooner. How did you finally do it? Turn him in, I mean. Weren't you scared? Terrified. But I realized something important. I'd spent 46 years being scared of the wrong things. I was scared of being alone, of being judged, of disrupting everyone's lives. But I should have been scared of wasting my life with a man who saw me as a convenient fool. Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I know." "I'm not strong, honey. I'm just tired of being weak." A year after Richard's sentencing, I did something I'd always dreamed about, but never had the courage to pursue. I enrolled in pottery classes at the community college. My instructor was a woman named Maria, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers. "Have you ever worked with clay before?" she asked. "Never, but I've spent 75 years being shaped by other people's hands. I thought it was time I learned to shape something myself." Maria smiled. "I think you're going to like it here." And for the first time in years, I believed her. She was right. There was something meditative about working with clay, about creating something beautiful from nothing. My pieces were amateur at best, lopsided bowls and asymmetrical vases, but they were mine. One afternoon, while I was struggling with a particularly stubborn piece of clay, a man sat down at the wheel next to mine. He was probably in his late 70s, with silver hair and deep-set wrinkles that spoke of a life well lived. "That clay giving you trouble?" he asked. "It has a mind of its own. Clay's like that. You can't force it. You have to work with it, convince it to become what you want." I looked at my misshapen bowl. "I'm not sure I'm convincing enough," he laughed. "Give it time. I'm Thomas, by the way. Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie." Over the following weeks, Thomas and I developed a friendship. He was a widower whose wife had passed away 3 years earlier. He'd retired from teaching high school English and was learning pottery to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. "Do you miss her?" I asked one day while we were cleaning up after class. "Every day. But missing her doesn't mean I can't also enjoy what's ahead." It was a simple statement, but it resonated deeply. I'd been so focused on grieving what I'd lost that I hadn't considered what I might gain. "I was married for 46 years, I heard myself say. He's in prison now for fraud and theft. Everyone thinks I should be devastated, and maybe I should be, but mostly I just feel relieved." Thomas nodded slowly. "Sounds like you've been carrying a heavy load for a long time." I didn't realize how heavy until I put it down. We stood there in comfortable silence, washing clay from our hands and listening to Maria hum while she reorganized the studio. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" Thomas asked. "As friends, I mean. No pressure. Just coffee and conversation." A new chapter, one I never expected at 75. I smiled. "I'd like that very much." 2 years after Richard's arrest, I was sitting in my small apartment working on a pottery piece when Emily called. "Mom, Dad's lawyer called. They want to know if you'll visit him in prison. He's asking to see you." My hand stilled on the clay. "What did you tell them?" "That I'd ask you, but it was your decision entirely." I thought about Richard, about the man I'd loved and the man he'd actually been. Part of me was curious to see him, to understand what had driven him to destroy so many lives. But a larger part of me knew that closure didn't require confrontation. "Tell them thank you, but no. I have nothing to say to him." "Are you sure?" "Closure doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's just silence. Completely sure. Richard made his choices, and I've made mine. He doesn't get any more of my time. After hanging up, I returned to my pottery. My hands had learned patience over the past 2 years, learned that creating something beautiful required time, attention, and the willingness to start over when things fell apart. That evening, Thomas and I had dinner at a small Italian restaurant near the community center. We'd been seeing each other regularly for months now, nothing serious, just two old people enjoying each other's company without the weight of expectations. I heard from Richard today, I told him over pasta. He wants me to visit him in prison. Will you? No. I spent 46 years trying to fix things that were broken beyond repair. I'm done with that. Thomas raised his wine glass. To being done with broken things. I clinked my glass against his. To starting over, even when you think it's too late. On my 76th birthday, I hosted a small party in my apartment. Emily came with her 3 children, Helen brought her famous chocolate cake, and Thomas arrived with a pottery piece he'd made, a beautiful blue vase that caught the light just right. Speech, Helen called out, and everyone joined in. I stood in my tiny living room, surrounded by the people who mattered most, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought tears to my eyes. I've been thinking a lot lately about the woman I was 2 years ago, I began. She would have been terrified to be standing here in this small apartment with her rented furniture and second-hand dishes. She measured her worth by the size of her house and the length of her marriage. She thought security came from staying quiet and keeping everyone happy. If only she knew what strength looked like, she'd see it standing here today. I looked at Emily, who was holding her youngest daughter, but that woman was wrong about almost everything. Real security comes from knowing you can survive on your own. Real strength comes from choosing to start over, even when it's hard and scary and everyone thinks you should just accept things as they are. Hear, hear, Helen called out. I lost almost everything 2 years ago, but I gained something more valuable, myself. I learned that it's never too late to become the person you should have been all along. I learned that betrayal can be a gift if it shows you the truth you've been too scared to see. Thomas squeezed my hand gently. So thank you all of you for standing by me while I figured out who Maggie Sullivan really is. And if there's one thing I want you all to remember, it's this. Don't wait until you're 74 to demand the life you deserve. Don't accept less than honesty, respect, and genuine love. And don't ever let someone convince you that you're too old, too tired, or too invested to start fresh. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my small balcony looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. I love you, Mom. I typed back. I love you too, sweetheart. And remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. As I set my phone down, I thought about Richard in his prison cell, about Cheryl who disappeared as soon as the money ran out, about the life I'd left behind. I should have felt sad or angry or regretful. Instead, I felt free. 3 years after Richard's arrest, I opened my own small pottery studio in partnership with Maria and Thomas. We called it Fresh Starts, a place where people of all ages could come learn to create something beautiful from nothing. Our first student was a woman in her 60s who just divorced her husband of 30 years. I don't know who I am anymore, she told me on her first day. I handed her a lump of clay. Then let's find out. Richard served 7 years of his 12-year sentence before being released for good behavior. I heard he moved to Arizona and worked at a hardware store. Emily visited him once and came back shaking her head. He still doesn't get it, Mom. He still thinks he's the victim in all of this. Some people never do, I said. But that's not our problem anymore. On my 80th birthday, Thomas asked me to marry him. We were at the pottery studio, covered in clay, and laughing about a bowl that had collapsed spectacularly on the wheel. Marry you? I repeated, surprised. Thomas, we're in our 80s. Isn't that a bit sensible? Practical? Wonderful. He was grinning. Maggie, I'm not asking you to marry me because I need someone to take care of me or cook my meals or any of that traditional nonsense. I'm asking because I love you, and I want to spend whatever time I have left making pottery and terrible jokes and enjoying life with someone who understands that it's never too late to be happy. I looked at this kind, patient man who'd taught me that love didn't have to be complicated or painful or conditional. Yes, I said, but I'm keeping my own apartment for my pottery supplies. He laughed. I wouldn't have it any other way. We got married in a small ceremony at the community center, surrounded by our students, friends, and family. Emily cried happy tears and said she'd never seen me look more beautiful. Helen gave a speech about never giving up on love, no matter how many times it disappoints you. And I wore a blue dress and clay-stained hands because that's who I was now, someone who wasn't afraid to get messy in pursuit of something beautiful. As Thomas and I danced at our reception, slow and careful, mindful of our aging bodies but grateful for every moment, I thought about the woman I'd been at 74, standing in her kitchen and calling the police on her husband. She'd been terrified, angry, and completely lost, but she'd also been brave in a way she'd never been before. And that bravery had led to this, a life filled with pottery and laughter and the kind of love that doesn't require you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. What are you thinking about? Thomas whispered. About how the worst thing that ever happened to me turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. He kissed my forehead gently. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find out what we really need. And what do we really need? Not much. Just the courage to start over and the wisdom to recognize when something's worth keeping. I smiled against his shoulder, moving slowly to the music, and silently thanked the younger version of myself, the one who'd been brave enough to call the police, to file for divorce, to turn her husband in despite knowing it would cost her everything. She'd given me this, a second chance at life, and I intended to make the most of every single day of it. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I hope it reminds someone out there that it's never too late to demand better. It's never too late to start over. And it's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own stories in the comments. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be told. After all, we're never too old to learn, grow, and begin again.